Hello, hello, hello. Let's talk about Papillon. 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 Nah, I think I recall from the movie his name was Papillon, pronounced that way. So that's what it is. And so yeah, I saw this movie recently. It just might be the most boring prison break movie I've ever seen. Now, I knew next to nothing about this film before going to see it, except that in IMDb they briefly described it as a prison break movie, essentially. And the stars are Rami Malek and Charlie Hunnam. Charlie Hunnam, who I've been more of a fan of in his recent works, and Rami Malek, who I've never seen him in anything, but I know he's playing Freddie Mercury in the upcoming Queen biopic, so whatever. Mostly my MoviePass subscription is expiring, and it was the only thing that I was able to see, so I saw it. Now, going in with those expectations might have sunk this experience for me. I probably should have done some research on the actual real life story so I could more appreciate the characters and the story. I was going in with the expectation that I've gotten with all of the Prison Break movies I've seen, which aren't very many, but all of them basically have the protagonist that's wrongfully accused and sent to prison, spends the most of the movie acquainting himself with the inmates and devising his plan, and then the last act is the prison break, and it's all very exciting. It's tense stuff, and that's what I was expecting. I didn't know there was any other way to do a prison break movie, but this one just drolls on, and it takes its time. And I guess if you have a connection to the story, and apparently the old movie that this was a remake of, I guess, if you have a connection to that, maybe you can appreciate the characters in this story more. But I was just bored out of my mind. Now, the film does follow that formula for a little while, maybe like the first 30 minutes or so. Papillon gets to this prison. He starts befriending all the right people, someone who has money, someone who can get him supplies. You know, he's building that plot towards the prison break, and it's interesting. It's at least enough to keep your attention. You can tell they're building momentum towards the big prison break, and then, no spoilers, but something happens, and then all the air is taken out of the sails. Momentum is stopped in its tracks, and then it resets after a few minutes of this moment. It just resets, and he's back at it. And then the same thing happens later in the movie, and the momentum's halted again. It's these starts and stops that just, by the end, I was just completely uninterested because it didn't have that kind of through line. It wasn't cohesive, really. But like I said, it's a true story, so maybe it's the most faithful film adaptation of a real-life event ever put to screen. And maybe the people who know the real story are appreciative of that fact. But as a cinematic experience for someone who's not aware of the story, it was super frustrating to follow and ultimately very boring. Fair warning, I can't talk about the next part of my review without spoiling a little bit of the plot. It's not some end of the movie reveal I'm spoiling, but if you're going to see this movie and you don't want any kind of spoilers, then the next 3 minutes you might want to skip. There's a way this film could have gone with the narrative that I think would have made things infinitely more interesting. Now, again, I know it's based on a true story, so I'm not advocating they change history, but as a cinematic experience, here's how I think it could have been improved. So you start off the film, the journey to this prison, and it's established that Papillon is the tough guy. He's offers his guardianship. He offers to watch out for the little meek guy on the boat, and that's Rami Malek's character. And he's super rich, so he's trying to befriend him, and so he can use him for his money, basically. So he offers him protection. They got the big tough guy and the little meek guy, and that's the dynamic for the first half of the movie. And then the thing I mentioned happens, where the momentum just drops off the face of the earth. He goes to solitary confinement. Papillon gets put into solitary confinement for 3 years, and you kind of get the sense that he's lost his mind at the end of the 3 years. After he gets let out, he's in the hospital, and Rami Malek's character, he's still alive. He hasn't been killed in prison for 3 years. And he goes to see Papillon, and he thinks maybe Papillon's lost his mind. And clearly Rami Malek's character has worked his way up. He's essentially the Andy Dufresne from Shawshank Redemption. He's working the books of the warden. He's worked his way up. So he's kind of on top of things now. And it looks like Papillon is just outside of his mind. So you have this opportunity to make Rami Malek's character, to flip it. Have him be the guy that's going to get Papillon going, to keep him, kind of be his watchful protector now. Like, things have changed, he's grown, it's been 3 years. But what actually happens in the movie is Papillon's just joking. He's been playing a part for 3 years, I guess, of the he's lost his mind, that kind of part. And he's just clowning, he's fine, and the movie just continues to go along. The dynamic doesn't change for the whole movie, except for one moment that just is a fleeting moment, and then that's past. So I think it would have been more interesting if halfway through the movie you have that flip, and Rami Malek's character now has to inspire Papillon to continue his plans for escape. That would have made for a more interesting movie, I think. Again, not what happened clearly in history, so they're not going to put that in the movie and call it an adaptation of that story. But for just purely cinematic reasons, I think it definitely would have made a more interesting film. But I digress. And more than just making the plot more interesting with the alternate version I just mentioned, I really think it would have made it deep. It would deepen the friendship between the two characters. Clearly, that's what the movie was banking on. They weren't going for the straightforward prison break movie. They were going for, these two unlikely friends are gonna become close, and your heart's gonna be with them by the end, and you're gonna be tearing up and just rooting for them. And I think because the plot wasn't so cut and dry, but the character stuff was. They had an opportunity to tinker with the character dynamics. That would have been different and interesting, but they didn't do that. They left that completely the same, didn't deviate from the formula in that regard at all, but did it with the plot, and I think it should have been flip-flopped, or both, mess with both of them. But the character dynamic just was not interesting at all, so it didn't, and they were clearly banking on that, because it wasn't a prison break movie in the traditional sense. It was a character movie. Look, I love these characters, what they're trying to instill in you, and it just didn't work. For myself, maybe some people liked it, I don't know. But yeah, I just didn't buy it, and you really needed to buy into it to get the emotional impact of the movie, I imagine. So all of that is pretty much the meat of why I didn't like the movie too much. But I did have a couple nitpicky things I'd like to mention. Firstly, this is a French prison in South America, and there's not a lick of non-American English speaking in this movie. It's bizarre. I mean, I understand Hollywood usually not going with subtitles for films that are set in foreign places, but they usually at least go like a lazy route and just do a generic European. I mean, well, how hard is it to get like French accents? If you don't want to get French actors for whatever reason, you could have your actors have a French accent or a vaguely European one. There's literally the most French prison in South America, and it's the most American. Everyone at this prison is American, speaks American and American English, and it was just a strange thing. It doesn't usually bother me, but it was kind of bizarre. Secondly, at the end of the film, after the plot's wrapped up, they do the cliched wall of text with, here's what all these characters did after the events of this movie with the rest of their lives. blah 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 blah. But then after that, they cut to some black and white footage of the actual prison and like prisoners in there getting ushered in and stuff, with text over that, basically trying to drum up sympathy for all the prisoners and tell you how awful the prison was. And basically, it felt like they were trying to drum up like prisons are awful and these prisoners are just treated so horribly. And they don't paint this prison in the movie as being particularly pretty or nice. But I would imagine for the 1930s, it wasn't the worst prison there possibly could be. And they make it sound like all the prisoners were wrongfully accused in this thing, and I'm sure that was not the case. I mean, Papillon was our hero. We were rooting for him, and he was wrongfully accused. But they made it sound like everyone in this movie, all the prisoners you saw, were there illegally, or they shouldn't have been there. And like, I'm sure that most of them probably committed awful murders or atrocities and probably deserved to be there. But it felt like if I hadn't just seen BlacKkKlansman a couple weeks ago, this probably wouldn't have occurred to me. But that film used an event from the past to reflect now and say, look, this stuff's still happening now. And this film, it felt like it did the exact same thing, only like, see how awful the prison system was back then? It's still awful today. They didn't say that explicitly, but that's just how it felt. And it just felt like a really strange message after the film we just saw. It was just weird. I don't know what to make of it. It was an odd note to end that movie on. But it stuck out. I mean, most of the movie was boring to me, and I remember this pretty well. So there's that. So yep, that's my 2 cents on the movie. Whether or not it was a faithful adaptation of the adventure, it was super uninteresting the way they translated it to the screen. For me, maybe history buffs will be just applauding how accurate it is. I don't know. But I think it could have, for a cinematic experience, it could have been done better. And I'm not advocating that every Prison Break movie should stick to that formula that I mentioned earlier. I was open and would be excited to see a new take on it. But however they went about it in this one just did not work for me. Maybe y'all will have better luck. I give it like a 52%. Yeah, it was. It's not the worst thing I've seen this year. It's not inherently bad, objectively bad or anything. It's just me personally at bored. What can you do? So I'll talk to you guys next time with whatever I see then. Bye bye.